Rock has its own kind of unique energy.
Well, it's not for me. Work.
Yeah, or whatever.
Or
Just like,
I mean, it's easy for you to say when you're good.
Sorry, I just don't want you to get in trouble.
I know.
focus up. This is very serious.
Pina colada?
I don't like the taste of alcohol. My taxes.
You...
I'm trying to say that I sort of dropped you guys there.
Field trip to the bar.
All right.
Do what?
Fuck that.
School musical?
Sarah will sing in bar with
My
you
car's
guys.
headed to Greedos.
We could drop her off on the way.
I can take you.
Have it. Great, just bought a guy's heroin.
Not funny, didn't know what it's like to me.
Well, it's not. I mean, it's just a job.
Feeling love, and I want to feel love if I want to.
Most time travel stories ask one simple question: what would you change if you could go back? Dark takes that question, breaks it apart, and turns it into something much more painful. Because in this story, time travel doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a prison. Every choice that looks like an escape route becomes another lock on the same door. Every character who thinks they're fixing the past is usually building the future they were terrified of. And by the time the full series reveals what's really happening in Winden, the mystery is no longer just about missing children, secret caves, or a machine that bends time. It's about grief. It's about parents and children hurting each other across generations. It's about people who would rather destroy the world than accept a loss they can't undo. And that's why Dark became one of Netflix's most respected mystery shows. Not because it was complicated just to look clever, but because its complexity had emotional weight. The family trees, the loops, the alternate worlds, the strange objects, the repeated phrases, the old photographs, the clockmaker, the nuclear plant, the cave, the apocalypse, all of it leads back to one terrifying idea. What if the thing you're trying to prevent only exists because you tried to prevent it? The story begins in the fictional German town of Winden, a place that already feels trapped before anyone talks about time travel. The forests are dense, the streets are quiet, the houses look ordinary, but everyone inside them seems to be hiding something. Winden is the kind of town where people know each other too well and understand each other too little. The past is always close, but nobody wants to look directly at it. At the center of the opening mystery is Jonas Kahnwald, a teenage boy still recovering from the suicide of his father, Michael. Jonas doesn't understand why Michael took his own life. He doesn't understand the strange letter his father left behind, and he definitely doesn't understand why the adults around him seem to carry fear like a second language. But Jonas is not the only person already wounded when the series starts. His mother, Hannah, is lonely, manipulative, and emotionally desperate. His friend Martha Nielsen is caught between affection, guilt, and family pressure. Martha's brother Magnus is restless and angry. Their younger brother Mikkel is sensitive and overlooked. Their mother Katharina is intense, protective, and suspicious. Their father Ulrich is a police officer whose life is already tangled in betrayal before the bigger truth arrives. Then a child disappears. At first, Dark appears to be setting up a familiar small-town mystery: a missing boy, worried parents, police searches, a strange forest, a community with secrets. The disappearance of Eric Obendorf creates panic, and then Mikkel Nielsen disappears as well, making the fear personal for almost every major family in Winden. But the first major twist is not that someone killed Mikkel. The twist is that Mikkel has traveled back in time. He enters the cave in 2019 and comes out in 1986, and once he's trapped there, the show's entire shape changes. Mikkel is not just a missing child. He is the future father of Jonas. The boy Jonas is trying to find is also the man who raised him. Michael Kahnwald was Mikkel Nielsen all along. That reveal is the first moment where Dark shows its real identity. This is not a story where time travel creates a few fun surprises. This is a story where time travel is built into the bones of the characters' lives. Jonas doesn't simply discover the past. He discovers that his own existence depends on a tragedy. If Mikkel comes home, Jonas may never be born. If Jonas saves the boy, he destroys himself. If he protects himself, he abandons Mikkel. And that's the emotional trap that defines the whole series. Season 1 moves through 3 main time periods: 2019, 1986, and 1953. Each period reveals a different layer of Winden, and each layer makes the town feel less like a normal place and more like a machine that has been running for decades. The cave is not just a cave, it is a passage. The nuclear plant is not just a workplace. It is connected to a dangerous event that created the strange material behind the time loop. The older residents are not simply carrying memories. Some of them are carrying knowledge. One of the most important figures early on is Ulrich Nielsen. He begins as a flawed but understandable man, a father desperate to find his son, a husband cheating on Katharina with Hannah, and a police officer haunted by the earlier disappearance of his brother Mads in 1986. When Mikkel vanishes, Ulrich's old trauma returns with full force. He starts to suspect that the past and present are somehow connected, especially when the body of a young boy appears with injuries and strange marks that don't fit a normal crime. Ulrich's search leads him into the cave and eventually back to 1953. There he finds young Helge Doppler, a boy he believes will grow up to participate in the kidnappings. Ulrich makes a brutal choice. He tries to kill Helge as a child, thinking he can stop everything before it begins. But here's the thing. Ulrich does not prevent the nightmare. He helps create it, because Helga survives. And the damage Ulrich causes becomes part of the same chain of trauma that leads Helge toward Noah, the mysterious priest-like figure who seems to know far too much about time. Ulrich's attempt to change history becomes one of the reasons history unfolds the way it does. Dark is telling the audience very early that intention doesn't matter as much as consequence. A loving father can become a monster if he believes violence is the only way to save his family. And that idea repeats everywhere. Helge Doppler is not introduced as a simple villain. As an older man, he is confused, frightened, and broken by memories he can barely carry. As a child, he is lonely and abused. As an adult in 1986, he assists Noah in experiments connected to time travel, including the deaths of children. But the show keeps asking a difficult question: how much of Helge's life was chosen, and how much of it was shaped by people who used him, hurt him, and trapped him inside a cycle? Noah, at this stage, feels like the face of the conspiracy. He has the calm voice, the religious language, the secret bunker, and the terrifying confidence of someone who believes every awful act has a purpose. He recruits, manipulates, and kills with the certainty of a man serving a larger design. Season 1 uses him almost like a shadow over the town. Whenever the mystery seems to become practical, Noah makes it spiritual. He talks about time as if it is God's territory, and he behaves as if ordinary morality no longer applies. But Dark is careful. It doesn't explain Noah too quickly. It lets him become a symbol first, the man who knows the rules while everyone else is still discovering the game. Meanwhile, Jonas begins his own transformation. He starts as a grieving teenager searching for answers, but the more he learns, the less innocent his search becomes. When he discovers that Mikkel is his father, he faces a truth no child should have to process. His family is not just broken by suicide, it is built on a time paradox. His pain is not separate from Winden's mystery. It is one of the mystery's central engines. This is where the show's hidden genius begins to show. Dark doesn't use time travel as decoration. It uses time travel to make family trauma literal. Children inherit the mistakes of their parents, but in Winden, that inheritance is not just emotional, it is physical. A child can become his own ancestor. A parent can be younger than their child. A person can spend their whole life trying to escape a wound that they are destined to cause. And because the series spans generations, every family becomes a puzzle. The Nielsens, the Kahnwalds, the Dopplers, and the Tiedemanns all seem separate at first, but their histories keep folding into one another. Regina Tiedemann's pain connects to old bullying and family secrets. Claudia Tiedemann's rise at the nuclear plant connects to knowledge that will later make her one of the most important players in the entire story. Charlotte Doppler, the police chief investigating the disappearances, is surrounded by mysteries in her own family long before she understands how impossible her family history really is. Season 1 keeps pulling the viewer forward with questions, but the strongest question is not simply, who took the children? The stronger question is, how many people in this town are already living inside the consequences of a choice they haven't made yet? That question becomes even more powerful when the stranger appears. At first, he is just a mysterious adult man with scars, knowledge, and a deep sadness. He watches Jonas, guides him, and seems to understand the cave and the time loop better than almost anyone. Eventually, the truth becomes clear. The stranger is an older Jonas. This reveal changes the emotional pressure of the series. Jonas is not only being watched by a future version of himself, he is being shaped by him. The older Jonas wants to close the passage and end the loop, but like so many others in Dark, his attempt to fix the system only keeps the system alive. He believes he understands enough to break the cycle, but he doesn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that's what makes Dark different from many mystery shows. The answers do not bring relief, they bring heavier questions. When Jonas learns more, he does not become free. He becomes responsible. When Ulrich finds the past, he does not save Mikkel. He becomes trapped in 1953 and later imprisoned, aging into another ghost of Winden. When Mikkel adjusts to life in 1986, he is not healed. He slowly becomes Michael, the man whose death will push Jonas into the mystery. When Helgi survives Ulrich's attack, the cycle does not break. It tightens. By the end of the first season, the audience understands that Winden's tragedy is not a straight line. It is a knot, and the knot has rules. Events repeat in cycles. Certain moments seem destined. People meet older or younger versions of themselves. Objects and information can exist without a clear origin, passed from one time period to another. This is the bootstrap paradox. Something exists because it was always passed along, with no clean beginning. A book, a machine design, a piece of knowledge, even a life can become trapped in that kind of loop. Dark uses this idea constantly, but it never treats it like a cold science lesson. It makes the paradox emotional. Jonas exists because Mikkel went back in time. Mikkel stays in the past because Jonas exists. Michael dies because he is convinced his death must happen to preserve Jonas's life. Jonas investigates because Michael dies. Every cause is also an effect. Every beginning is also an ending. That is why the phrase, "the beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning," matters so much. It is not just a mysterious line. It is the structure of the whole show. Season 1 closes by pushing Jonas even deeper into the machinery of time. The bunker, the chair experiments, the cave passage, the nuclear accident, Noah's plans, Helga's guilt, Claudia's knowledge, and the stranger's failed attempt to destroy the wormhole all collide. Instead of closing the loop, the events send Jonas into another time, a devastated future. And suddenly Dark expands again, because the show is no longer only about 3 generations of secrets. It is about an apocalypse. It is about a future where Winden has been destroyed. It is about the possibility that all of these painful loops are leading toward one catastrophic event that has already happened from someone else's point of view. That final movement is crucial because it changes what the audience thinks the mission is. At first, we think Jonas needs to find Mikkel. Then we think he needs to understand his father. Then we think he needs to close the passage. But by the end of the first season, the real question becomes much bigger. Can anyone stop what time itself seems determined to protect? And the answer, at least for now, is no, because everyone in Winden is still making the same mistake. They believe that if they can just reach the right moment, save the right person, kill the right enemy, or close the right door, the nightmare will end. But Dark is slowly teaching us that the nightmare survives through those exact attempts. That is the tragedy of the first season. Not that people fail because they don't care. They fail because they care too much. Ulrich loves Mikkel, so he destroys Helga's childhood. Jonas loves his father, so he follows the path that preserves his own pain. The stranger wants to save the world, so he repeats the actions that keep the cycle alive. Helge is broken by fear and manipulation, so he becomes part of the machine that once terrified him. Noah speaks of purpose, but his purpose demands suffering from children. And Winden keeps turning. By the time season 1 ends, Dark has built a mystery that feels almost impossible to solve, but the emotional map is already clear. This is a story about people trapped by love, guilt, and the fantasy that pain can be undone if you just find the correct door into yesterday. But the next stage of the series makes the trap even crueler, because Season 2 reveals that the loop is not simply a strange accident hiding under Winden. There are factions inside it. There are people fighting to preserve it, people fighting to destroy it, and people who think they're choosing freely while someone older, smarter, and more damaged is already moving them into position. And at the center of that next reveal is the most frightening version of Jonas himself. Season 2 begins with a simple but brutal shift in perspective. The first season made time feel like a mystery. The second season makes time feel like a battlefield. Jonas is now in the future, after the apocalypse has already destroyed Winden. The town that once felt quiet and haunted is now a ruined zone controlled by survivors, strict rules, and fear. The nuclear plant has become the center of the devastation, and the question is no longer just what happened in the past. The question is what kind of future all these choices are creating. This future version of Winden is important because it shows the audience the end result before the characters in 2020 fully understand the road leading there. Dark keeps doing this. It gives us consequences first, then forces us to watch the causes unfold. That structure creates dread instead of surprise. We are not simply wondering whether disaster will happen, we know it will. So every attempt to avoid it feels heavier because every action might be one of the reasons it arrives. Jonas, trapped in the future, sees what the apocalypse has done. He sees a world with no comfort, no normal family life, no clean answers. Elisabeth Doppler, who was once a young deaf girl in 2019, is now a hardened leader in the post-apocalyptic zone. That alone tells us how much time and suffering have changed people. Dark rarely needs long speeches to show transformation. It can simply place a character in a new time, let us see who they became, and allow the shock to do the work. But Jonas is still Jonas. Even after everything he has learned, he believes there must be a way to stop the disaster. He believes the future is not fixed. He believes knowledge can become freedom. And this is where Season 2 becomes even more painful, because the older characters already know what Jonas does not want to accept. Knowledge can also become another form of imprisonment. The older Jonas, the stranger, is still trying to break the cycle. But now we start to understand that even he is not the final version of Jonas. Somewhere beyond him is Adam, the scarred, powerful leader of Sic Mundus, the secret organization operating across time. Adam is not just another time traveler. He is the nightmare endpoint of Jonas's path. The reveal that Adam is an even older Jonas changes the entire emotional center of the show, because now Jonas is not only trying to stop an external villain, he is trying to avoid becoming one. Adam represents what happens when pain, repetition, and obsession destroy the original person underneath. His face is scarred by time travel, but the real horror is not physical. The real horror is that he speaks with the calm certainty of someone who has suffered so much that he no longer sees people as people. He sees them as pieces in a design. He believes the cycle must continue until it can be destroyed completely. And if innocent people have to suffer along the way, Adam treats that suffering as necessary. This is what makes him terrifying. He doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as the only one strong enough to do what everyone else is too sentimental to do. That is a very dark kind of villain. Not a villain who wants power for simple reasons, but a villain who used to be the hero. A villain who remembers love, remembers loss, remembers hope, and has decided that hope is the cruelest illusion of all. Season 2 also gives more weight to Sic Mundus, the group built around the idea that time can be mastered. The name, the underground rooms, the old photographs, the strange machinery, the Latin motto, the religious atmosphere, it all makes the organization feel less like a science project and more like a cult. Sic Mundus does not simply study time. It worships the loop. It gives pain a mythology. It tells its followers that every sacrifice has meaning because everything is part of a larger plan. And that is exactly how people survive unbearable guilt. They convince themselves the suffering had to happen. Noah becomes more complicated in this season as well. In season 1, he seemed like a cold manipulator, almost pure threat. But season 2 begins pulling back the curtain. We learn that Noah has his own emotional motives, especially connected to his family and to Charlotte. His cruelty is still real, but it is no longer random. He is another person caught between belief, manipulation, and personal loss. This is one of Dark's strongest habits. It introduces characters as monsters, then reveals the wound that made them useful to the system. Noah is dangerous because he believes, but he also believes because he has been used. Adam gives him a mission, a purpose, and the promise of reunion. That promise keeps Noah loyal until he starts to understand that Adam has hidden the full truth from him. And once again, love becomes the trap. The show also deepens Claudia Tiedemann's role. If Adam represents one side of the time war, Claudia represents another. Known later as the White Devil by some characters, Claudia is not innocent, and she is not simply heroic. She manipulates events, guides people, hides information, and makes choices that hurt others. But unlike Adam, Claudia's mission is built around studying the knot carefully enough to find a real exit. Her relationship with Regina gives her story emotional grounding. Regina is not just a name on a family tree. She is Claudia's daughter, and Claudia's desire to save her matters deeply. Dark keeps the cosmic stakes connected to intimate stakes. The apocalypse matters because it destroys a town, but it also matters because it destroys a daughter, a parent, a child, a lover. The big machine is always powered by private grief. In 1987, Claudia's younger self begins discovering truths that will eventually transform her into one of the most knowledgeable players in the entire series. Her father, Egon Tiedemann, is also pulled deeper into the mystery. Egon is one of the show's saddest figures because he spends much of his life sensing that something is wrong, but never fully reaching the truth in time. He is not brilliant in the way Claudia is, and he is not ruthless like Adam. He is an ordinary man trying to understand extraordinary damage. His connection to Ulrich is especially tragic. In 1953, Egon helps imprison Ulrich because Ulrich appears to be a violent stranger who attacked a child. Decades later, in 1987, Egon meets the older Ulrich in the psychiatric ward and slowly realizes this man's story may be impossible but true. The tragedy is that Egon is always close to understanding the pattern, but the pattern is larger than his world allows, and Ulrich's fate becomes one of the series' clearest examples of time as a prison. He wanted to save his son. Instead, he loses his wife, his children, his identity, and decades of his life. He becomes a man displaced from his own era, trapped in a system where the truth sounds like madness. When Katharina later discovers more and begins searching for him, the emotional damage spreads again. One disappearance has become a generational wound. Katharina's arc in Season 2 is powerful because she is no longer just the angry mother from the first season. She becomes someone forced to accept that the impossible is real. Her husband did not simply abandon the family. Her son did not simply vanish. Her entire life has been shaped by a secret structure under the surface of the town. And when she begins to move toward the cave and the truth, the show positions her as another desperate parent entering the same trap that consumed Ulrich. That pattern matters. Dark is full of parents trying to save children and children trying to understand parents. But the loop keeps turning that love into damage. Charlotte Doppler's story becomes one of the most mind-bending examples. She is investigating the disappearances, but her own origin is part of the mystery. Her connection to Elisabeth is not just mother and daughter in the normal sense. The full truth, revealed across the series, is that Charlotte and Elisabeth are each other's mother and daughter through the time loop. Elisabeth gives birth to Charlotte in the future, and Charlotte later gives birth to Elisabeth in the past. This is the kind of reveal that could feel ridiculous in a weaker show, but Dark makes it devastating because it is not played as a gimmick. It shows how the loop violates the natural order of family. It turns motherhood into a paradox. It makes love real and impossible at the same time. Charlotte loves Elisabeth as her child. Elisabeth loves Charlotte as her child. Both are true. Neither has a normal beginning. That is the horror of Winden. Even family love has been folded into the knot. Season 2 also brings Martha and Jonas closer to the emotional center. Their relationship is complicated from the beginning because Jonas and Martha are connected in ways they don't initially understand. Martha is Jonas's aunt because Mikkel is her brother, and Jonas is Mikkel's son. But emotionally, they are also teenagers in love, and the show uses that impossible contradiction to make Jonas's life even more painful. For Jonas, Martha represents the life he wanted before the truth arrived. She is love, normalcy, possibility. But she is also proof that his existence is tangled in something forbidden by the logic of ordinary family. Their bond is one of the reasons Jonas keeps fighting and one of the reasons he keeps breaking. This becomes crucial as the season builds toward the apocalypse on June 27, 2020. The date gives the season a ticking clock structure. Characters move through different years, but everything is being pulled toward one fixed disaster. The audience knows the apocalypse is coming. The characters learn it in fragments. Some try to prevent it. Some try to ensure it. Some do not understand they are helping it happen. And Adam uses that confusion with terrifying precision. When Jonas finally meets Adam, he believes he is meeting the person who can explain the whole system. In a way, he is. But Adam's explanations are never innocent. He tells Jonas about cycles, sacrifice, and the illusion of free will. He positions himself as someone who has already walked Jonas's path and knows every mistake Jonas is about to make. That creates one of the show's most disturbing pressures. How do you rebel against someone who remembers being you? Adam's plan depends on Jonas's pain. He knows which emotional buttons to press because he once had the same heart. He understands Jonas's love for Martha because it used to be his own love. He understands Jonas's guilt over Michael because it used to be his own guilt. Adam is not guessing. He is weaponizing memory. One of Season 2's most heartbreaking episodes sends Jonas back to the day before Michael's suicide. Jonas believes he can stop his father from dying. But instead, he discovers that Michael did not originally plan to kill himself in the way Jonas imagined. The visit itself helps create the decision. Jonas, trying to save his father, becomes part of the reason his father accepts death as necessary. This is dark at its cruelest and most brilliant. The scene reframes the entire beginning of the series. Michael's suicide was not simply the event that launched Jonas into the mystery. It was also an event shaped by Jonas's own future intervention. Jonas becomes the cause of the wound that defined him. And Michael, or Mikkel, chooses death not because he doesn't love his son, but because he believes Jonas must exist. That is the emotional core of the loop. People sacrifice themselves and others to preserve the people they love, but those sacrifices keep the prison standing. As the apocalypse approaches, the season crosscuts between characters making choices that feel urgent, personal, and doomed. Clausen investigates the nuclear plant. Weller's secrets linger in the background. Alexander Tiedemann's past becomes pressure. The barrels of radioactive waste, hidden for decades, become part of the physical trigger. The God particle, the strange dark matter connected to time travel, becomes both scientific object and almost supernatural force. The apocalypse is not random. It is the result of secrets, cover-ups, grief, ambition, and manipulation layered across generations. And then Adam makes the move that breaks Jonas completely. He kills Martha. For Jonas, this is the ultimate wound. The person he loves is murdered by the person he may become. Adam does not simply take Martha away. He uses her death to push Jonas further along the path toward becoming him. It is a self-fulfilling cruelty. Adam creates the trauma that helps create Adam. But just when the audience thinks the show has reached its biggest twist, another Martha appears. She is not the Martha Jonas knows. She comes from another world. And with that, dark changes shape again. The series is no longer only about time loops inside one reality. It is about parallel worlds, mirrored tragedies, and a knot more complicated than anyone except the oldest players truly understands. The final image of Season 2 tells us that the question has expanded. It is no longer only, when are we? Now the question is, which world are we in? And for Jonas, standing over the body of the Martha he loved, that question is not exciting, it is horrifying. Because if another Martha exists, then maybe the loop is bigger than death. Maybe loss itself has another version. Maybe every escape only leads to a different side of the same cage. And Season 3 will prove that the cage is even older, stranger, and more heartbreaking than Jonas ever imagined. Season 3 is where Dark stops pretending the knot can be understood from one side. Until now, the show has trained us to think in cycles, the same town, the same families, the same years repeating in patterns. 1953, 1986, 2019, 2020, 2052. A child disappears, a man becomes trapped, a father dies, a younger self meets an older self. Every tragedy seems to feed the next one. But the arrival of the second Martha reveals that Winden's nightmare is not only a loop, it is a mirror. There is another world, similar but not identical. Another Winden, another set of families, another version of Martha, another version of events. And in that world, Jonas does not exist, because Mikkel never becomes Michael, and Michael never becomes Jonas's father. That one missing life changes everything, but it does not save anyone. The second world is not a peaceful correction. It is another cage with different walls. This is one of the smartest choices in the final season. A weaker story might introduce a parallel world as a clean escape, a place where the characters can finally start over. Dark does the opposite. It says that duplication does not equal freedom. If the wound underneath remains the same, then another world only means another version of suffering. In the alternate world, Martha becomes what Jonas was in the first world, the emotional center of the mystery. She is pulled into impossible knowledge, forced to confront versions of herself, and pushed toward choices that feel personal but have already been arranged by older powers. Just as Jonas is shaped by Adam, Martha is shaped by Eva. Eva is the older version of Martha, and she becomes Adam's great opposite. If Adam wants to destroy the knot, Eva wants to preserve it. But that difference is not as simple as good versus evil. Eva is not protecting the loop because she enjoys suffering. She protects it because the loop guarantees the existence of her son, the unknown, the strange cleft-lip figure who appears at different ages and moves through time with eerie purpose. That child is the connection between Jonas and Martha, born from the two worlds. And because his existence depends on the knot, Eva sees the knot as something that must continue. To destroy it would be to erase him. Again, Dark brings the biggest cosmic conflict back to a parent and a child. Adam says the knot must die so suffering can end. Eva says the knot must live so her child can exist. Both are driven by love. Both become monstrous. Both manipulate younger versions of themselves and others. Both use pain as a tool. And both believe they are the only one brave enough to face the truth. This is why the final season is not just about explaining timelines. It is about exposing the emotional logic behind the war. Adam and Eva are not fighting because one wants chaos and the other wants order. They are fighting because they have chosen different answers to the same unbearable question. Is it better for a painful world to exist or for that world to be erased? For Adam, existence itself has become the problem. He has suffered so much, repeated so much, lost Martha so many times in so many ways that he believes the only mercy is annihilation. If the knot cannot produce freedom, then the knot must be destroyed. He wants to end the cycle, even if that means erasing everyone born from it. For Eva, erasure is the horror. The cycle may be painful, but inside it are real people, real bonds, real children. She cannot accept a solution that wipes out her son. So she preserves the cycle, not because she denies its cruelty, but because she chooses existence over peace. That is the philosophical heart of Season 3. and it makes the conflict much richer than a normal hero versus villain ending. The show also reveals how carefully both sides have been arranging events. The younger characters often believe they are making spontaneous decisions, but Adam and Eva have already mapped many of those decisions as part of their own strategies. The famous family tree, the mirrored rooms, the repeated objects, the carefully timed interventions. All of it shows that the knot survives because information is being passed around like a weapon, and the unknown becomes one of the creepiest symbols of that survival. He moves as three versions of himself, child, adult, and elder, often acting together. He speaks little, but his presence feels deeply wrong, like the knot has created a person who belongs everywhere and nowhere at once. He is not just a character, he is the living evidence that the two worlds have infected each other. Through him, the family lines become even more tangled, and the origin of several connections in Winden's family tree becomes clear. This is where the show's genealogical nightmare reaches its peak. Characters are not just related in surprising ways, some of them exist because of impossible loops. The family tree does not branch like a normal tree. It curls back into itself. Parents become descendants of their own descendants. Love affairs create bloodlines that should not be able to exist. The knot is biological, emotional, and temporal all at once. But Season 3 also understands the danger of becoming too mechanical. If the final season only explained who was related to whom, it would become a puzzle chart instead of a story. So the show keeps returning to grief. Katharina's fate is one of the most devastating examples. After everything she has learned, Katharina tries to rescue Ulrich from the past. She travels to 1987 and comes painfully close to freeing him from the psychiatric facility. For a moment, it feels like one of the show's long-running tragedies might finally be corrected. Ulrich might reunite with Katharina. He might escape the decades stolen from him. Maybe this time, love will actually break through the walls of time. But Dark does not allow the loop to bend that way. Katharina is killed by her own mother, Helene, in a brutal misunderstanding near the lake. And the horror of that scene is not only the death itself, it is the way the show connects it to details we have seen before. The lake, the necklace, the name, the old wounds of abuse and shame. Suddenly background details become part of a closed circle. Katharina does not simply die in the past. Her death becomes part of the emotional landscape that shaped her own life. The place where teenagers once joked about a dead woman in the lake was always connected to her. That is the kind of hidden detail Dark uses better than almost any series in its genre. It plants something that seems like local folklore or atmosphere, then later reveals it as the echo of a personal tragedy. The town is haunted because the characters have been walking over their own buried stories without knowing it. Ulrich's fate remains equally cruel. He spends his life trying to rescue Mikkel, then trying to survive imprisonment, then briefly believing Katharina may save him. But he never truly escapes. His story is one of the clearest arguments that Dark is not interested in easy redemption. Some choices cannot be undone. Some people are consumed by the knot before they ever understand its shape, and yet the show does not treat Ulrich as only a victim. His own violence helped create part of the horror. His affair damaged his family. His attack on young Helge was monstrous, even if it came from desperation. Dark lets him be sympathetic and guilty at the same time. That moral tension is one reason the characters feel human instead of symbolic. Hannah's story also becomes stranger and more revealing in the final season. From the beginning, Hannah is one of the show's most morally slippery characters. She is not a mastermind like Adam or Eva, but she is dangerous in a smaller, more intimate way. She lies, manipulates, and clings to people with a kind of emotional hunger that damages everyone around her. When she travels into the past, she does not use time travel to save the world. She uses it to pursue her own desires and escape consequences. That choice says a lot about Dark's view of human nature. Give people access to time, and not everyone becomes a hero or philosopher. Some people remain exactly who they were, just with a more powerful tool. But Hannah's later life also becomes part of the knot in a major way. Her relationship with Egon leads to the birth of Celia, whose role becomes crucial across generations. Celia connects to Bartos, and their children become Noah and Agnes. That means Hannah, who once seemed like a messy but ordinary figure in Jonas's domestic life, is woven into the deeper structure of Sic Mundus and the family lines. This is one of the reasons Dark rewards full series viewing. Early characters are rarely disposable. A person who seems emotionally important in one season may become structurally important later. A relationship that looks like a side path may turn out to be a central bridge. Bartos is another example. In the first season, he can seem like the friend who gets pulled into the mystery mostly because he is near Jonas and Martha, but his recruitment by Noah, his jealousy, his confusion, and his eventual place in the older timeline all matter. He becomes part of Sic Mundus's history, and through Celia, he becomes the father of Noah and Agnes. The boy who once looked like he was standing on the edge of the main story becomes an ancestor of some of its most important players. That transformation is part of Dark's larger design. The show keeps asking us not to underestimate anyone in Winden. The town is not divided into main characters and background characters in a simple way. It is a closed system. Every person may be a hinge. The final season also deepens the tragedy of Noah. Once we understand his family connections, his actions become even more painful. He is not forgiven because the things he did were horrifying, but he becomes understandable. He was a son, a brother, a father, and a believer. He was used by Adam, misled about the truth, and driven by the hope of finding Charlotte. When he turns against Adam, it is not because he suddenly becomes pure. It is because he realizes his faith has been exploited. That moment matters because Dark is full of false prophets. Adam, Eva, even Claudia at times, they all guide people with partial truths. They all understand that information is power and that withholding one piece of the picture can control someone's entire life. Noah's tragedy is that he thinks he is serving a divine order, but he is really serving someone else's strategy. Charlotte and Elisabeth's story remains one of the most emotionally impossible in the show. As mother and daughter to each other, they represent the knot at its most intimate. Their love is real, but its origin is circular. There is no clean first mother, no normal beginning. Their family bond exists because time has folded them into a paradox, and when they are separated across time, their grief becomes another engine of the story. Elisabeth's future hardness, Charlotte's investigation, Noah's longing, the baby taken from the future, all of it forms one of the show's most painful closed loops. Everyone is searching for family, and that search keeps the loop alive. Meanwhile, Jonas and alternate Martha are pushed closer to the central truth, even as older versions of themselves continue manipulating them. The young versions still feel hope. They still believe there might be a way to save someone. That innocence is what makes their journey tragic, because the audience has now seen what time can do to them. We have seen Jonas become Adam. We have seen Martha become Eva. We know that the young lovers are not just running from villains. They are running from their own possible futures. That gives every scene between them a double meaning. When Jonas looks at Martha, he sees the person he loves. The audience also sees the person whose death could create Adam, the person whose alternate self could create Eva, and the mother of the unknown who binds the worlds together. Their romance is tender, but it is also radioactive. It produces the knot's central bloodline. Dark uses their love as both beauty and disaster, and this is where the show's title becomes even more fitting. The darkness is not just the cave, the future wasteland, or the secrets under the nuclear plant. The darkness is the unknown inside love itself, the part of love that can become selfish, the part that says, I will save you, even if saving you destroys everyone else, the part that says, my child must live, even if the world has to suffer forever. That is why Adam and Eva are such strong final embodiments of the show's themes. They are what Jonas and Martha become when love loses humility, when grief becomes ideology, when personal pain turns into cosmic law. But the final answer does not come from Adam, and it does not come from Eva. It comes from Claudia, because Claudia eventually discovers that Adam and Eva are both wrong in the same crucial way. They believe there are two worlds locked together, but there is a third world, the origin world, a world before the split, a world where the knot began not with Jonas and Martha, but with H.G. Tannhaus and his grief. And that revelation changes the entire series. The real origin is not the cave. It is not Sic Mundus. It is not Adam. It is not Eva. It is not even Jonas and Martha's child. The true origin is a father who lost his family and tried to bring them back. H.G. Tannhaus, the clockmaker who seemed for much of the series like a guide, inventor, and keeper of strange knowledge, becomes the emotional source of the entire nightmare. In the origin world, his son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter die in a car accident. Unable to accept that loss, Tannhaus builds a machine to change reality. But instead of simply saving his family, his experiment splits the origin world and creates the two tangled worlds of Adam and Eva. Once that truth lands, the whole series becomes clearer and sadder. The knot was not created by evil. It was created by grief. And that means everyone inside the knot is living inside the echo of one man's refusal to let go. This is the final and most devastating version of Dark's central idea. All along, characters have been trying to reverse loss. Jonas wants Michael back. Ulrich wants Mikkel back. Claudia wants Regina saved. Noah wants Charlotte. Eva wants her son. Adam wants release from pain. And behind all of them is Tannhaus, the first grieving parent, the man whose impossible wish created impossible worlds. The beginning really is the end. The end really is the beginning. And now Jonas and Martha have to face the one choice no one in the knot has been able to make. They have to let themselves disappear. The origin world reveal works because it does something very difficult. It makes the huge puzzle smaller without making it feel less important. For 2 seasons, and most of the third, Dark expands outward. More years, more versions, more family connections, more travelers, more rules, more rooms, more machines, more scars. The viewer keeps discovering that the mystery is bigger than expected. First, it is a missing child case. Then it is a time loop. Then it is a generational conspiracy. Then it is an apocalypse. Then it is 2 worlds reflecting each other. But at the deepest point, the whole thing contracts into one moment of ordinary human pain. A family dies in a car accident. A father cannot accept it. A machine is built. Reality breaks. That is the final key, not because it answers every timeline question in a mechanical way, but because it explains why the show has always felt so sad. The knot is not powered by science first. It is powered by refusal. Refusal to grieve. Refusal to accept death. Refusal to let the dead stay dead. Refusal to allow one loss to remain one loss. H.G. Tannhaus is not a villain in the usual sense. That is what makes the reveal more haunting. He is not trying to dominate the world. He is not trying to create Sic Mundus. He is not trying to trap Jonas, Martha, Ulrich, Claudia, Charlotte, Elisabeth, Noah, or anyone else inside generations of suffering. He is simply a broken man reaching for his family. But in Dark, that is enough. Because the show's moral universe is not built around simple evil. It is built around consequences. A choice made from love can still destroy lives. A choice made from grief can still become monstrous. A wish to undo pain can multiply pain until entire worlds are born from it. This is why Claudia's discovery matters so much. She is the one who sees past the false binary. Adam believes Eva is the obstacle. Eva believes Adam is the threat. Each thinks the other side is the reason the knot continues. But Claudia realizes that both worlds are symptoms. Neither world is the true source. The real source is outside them. That discovery is not just intellectual. It is emotional. Claudia's love for Regina has driven so much of her journey. She wants to save her daughter, and for a long time, that desire makes her another manipulator inside the system. She lies, she guides, she withholds, She allows people to suffer because she believes she is moving toward a better answer. In that way, she is not completely different from Adam or Eva. She also turns love into strategy. But Claudia's advantage is patience. She studies the knot with a scientist's mind and a mother's desperation. Over countless cycles, she notices what does not fit. She learns that Regina's suffering is not necessarily tied to the knot in the way she assumed. She begins to understand that the only way to truly save Regina is not to preserve one side or destroy the other side blindly, but to remove the origin of the split itself. That is a very important distinction. Adam wants destruction because he hates the knot. Eva wants preservation because she loves what the knot produced. Claudia wants a third option because she finally understands the knot is not the real world, and that is what leads her to Adam in the finale. She does what almost no one has been able to do. She interrupts the pattern. She speaks to Adam at a point where he expects the usual cycle to continue, and she tells him there is another way. There is a loophole, a moment during the apocalypse when time stands still for a fraction of reality, allowing different outcomes to branch. This loophole is how some versions of events can happen differently while the larger knot still survives. That idea could easily become confusing, but emotionally it means something clear. Even inside a system built to repeat, there is one small crack. Not freedom everywhere, not endless choice. One crack, and that is enough. Adam, who has spent so long believing destruction is the only mercy, is forced to confront the possibility that he has misunderstood the real target. Eva was not the origin. The unknown was not the deepest origin. Jonas and Martha were not the true beginning. The two worlds themselves were consequences. So, Adam does something unexpected. Instead of killing Eva in the same old pattern, he goes to Jonas and sends him toward a different mission. This is one of the finale's most important emotional turns. Adam cannot undo everything he has done. He cannot become young again in any meaningful moral sense. But he can use the last remains of his knowledge to send Jonas and Martha toward the origin world. That choice does not make Adam innocent, but it proves that even the most damaged version of Jonas still contains a buried desire for release, not only for himself but for everyone trapped in the knot. Young Jonas then reaches alternate Martha, and together they travel to the origin world. This pairing is essential. The knot was sustained by the impossible bond between Jonas and Martha, by the child born from their worlds, by Adam and Eva's opposing obsessions. So the ending cannot belong to only one of them. Jonas alone cannot end it. Martha alone cannot end it. They have to act together. Their mission is painfully simple. They must prevent the car accident that killed Tannhaus's family. They are not going to kill a villain. They are not going to win a war. They are not going to repair a machine in a glowing finale full of easy triumph. They are going to stand in the road and convince a grieving future not to begin. That is what makes the ending so elegant. The entire series has been about people entering the past to force reality into the shape they want. But Jonas and Martha enter the origin world to stop the first act of refusal. They do not save themselves. They save the people whose deaths would lead to the creation of their worlds. They stop the wound before it becomes a universe. And the scene with Tannhaus's son, Marek, his daughter-in-law Sonia, and their baby is quiet compared to the scale of the story around it. That quietness is the point. Dark ends the cosmic nightmare through a human conversation on a rainy road. Jonas and Martha appear like ghosts or angels or impossible children from a reality that should never have existed. They persuade Marek to turn back, to return home, to reconcile before tragedy can strike. That single turn of the car changes everything. Tannhaus never loses his family in the same way. He never builds the machine out of grief. The origin world does not split. Adam's world and Eva's world are erased, and Jonas and Martha begin to disappear. This is where the finale becomes emotionally devastating, because the solution requires the erasure of almost everyone the viewer has followed. Jonas, Martha, Mikkel, Ulrich, Charlotte, Elizabeth, Noah, Agnes, Trante, and many others are products of the knot. If the knot never exists, they never exist. The victory is real, but it is not survival. It is release. The show does not present this as a simple, happy ending. It is more like a mercy that feels like death. Jonas and Martha understand, at least in the final moments, that their lives were born from a broken reality. Their love mattered. Their pain mattered. Their choices mattered, but they were also part of a world that should not have been created. That is one of Dark's boldest emotional moves. It asks the audience to accept that meaning does not always require permanence. Jonas and Martha can matter even if they are erased. Their love can be real even if the world that produced it vanishes. Their sacrifice can be beautiful even if no one remembers it. And some part of the finale suggests that traces remain, not in a simple timeline-proof way, not as a cheap setup, more like emotional residue, a feeling, a déjà vu, a name rising from somewhere unseen. The final dinner scene in the origin world brings together the characters who still exist because they were not products of the knot in the same impossible way. Hannah, Weller, Benny, Peter, Regina, and Katharina share a quiet evening while a storm moves outside. Compared to the rest of the series, the scene is almost peaceful, but it is not empty. Regina is alive, and that matters because so much of Claudia's mission was driven by her daughter's fate. Peter exists, Katharina exists, Hannah exists. These people are not living perfect lives, but they are living outside the closed nightmare of Adam and Eva's worlds. The absence of the knot does not create heaven. It creates normal uncertainty. And after everything the show has shown us, normal uncertainty feels like a gift. Then Hannah looks at the yellow raincoat, the lights flicker, and she describes a dream of darkness and the end of the world. She says that in the dream, she felt it was good for everything to be over, as if finally free. And when she is asked about the name of her unborn child, she considers the name Jonas. That final touch is haunting because it refuses to make the ending purely clean. Jonas does not exist as the Jonas we knew. The knot is gone. But something, some echo, some emotional shadow, seems to remain in the origin world. Not enough to restart the loop, not enough to undo the sacrifice, just enough to suggest that lives erased by time may still leave a mark. That is a very dark ending. It gives closure, but not comfort without complication, because the show was never really about beating time like a puzzle. It was about accepting what cannot be controlled. The characters trapped in the knot kept trying to master time because they could not master grief. They believed the right knowledge, the right machine, the right sacrifice, or the right murder would finally make pain obey them. But pain does not obey. Loss does not become harmless just because you understand its cause. And the final answer is not control. It is surrender. Jonas and Martha win by giving up the one thing almost every other character fought to protect, their own existence and the existence of the world that made them. They do not bend time for themselves. They step out of the way so the origin world can remain whole. That is why the finale works emotionally, even if viewers still need charts to track the family tree. The core feeling is simple. Two children of a broken reality choose to heal the wound that created them. They become the cure for their own existence. And this retroactively changes how we see the entire series. Mikkel's disappearance is no longer just the beginning of Jonas's story. It is one expression of the knot's deeper sickness. Michael's suicide is no longer only a tragic family event. It is part of a world where people are forced to preserve suffering so someone they love can live. Ulrich's attack on Helgi is no longer just a desperate mistake. It is another example of violence committed in the name of saving family. Noah's experiments are not random cruelty. They are what happens when faith and manipulation turn children into tools. Claudia's lies are not just cold strategy. They are a mother's love sharpened into a weapon. And Adam and Eva are not simply villainous older versions of Jonas and Martha. They are warnings. Adam is what grief becomes when it decides existence is the enemy. Eva is what grief becomes when it decides existence must be preserved at any cost. Claudia is what grief becomes when it finally starts looking for the truth instead of only protecting its own wound. Tannhaus is what grief becomes when it is given a machine. And Jonas and Martha, in the end, are what love becomes when it finally stops trying to possess the future. That is the full emotional architecture of Dark. Every paradox, every timeline, every repeated phrase, every object passed through time, every missing child, every scarred older self, every impossible parent-child relationship, they all point toward the same human fear. What if accepting loss feels impossible? The series answers by showing what happens when acceptance never comes. Worlds are born, families are twisted, children suffer, people become their own enemies. The dead keep returning in different forms, but never in a way that truly heals the living. Time becomes a maze built by grief, and the only way out is not to solve every corridor. It is to stop building the maze. This is why Dark's ending has stayed with viewers. It does not explain itself into emptiness. It allows the final sacrifice to breathe. The audience can mourn Jonas and Martha because the show has made them real, even though the final logic says they should never have existed. It lets the viewer feel the contradiction instead of smoothing it over. They were impossible, they were doomed, they were necessary, and then they were gone. One of the reasons Dark feels so complete is that its ending is not separate from its beginning. When you return to the first episode after knowing the full story, almost everything feels different. The quiet streets of Winden no longer feel like atmosphere only. They feel like a town unknowingly built over a wound in reality. Michael's suicide no longer feels like one family tragedy. It becomes one of the central moves in a cycle that has repeated again and again. Mikkel's disappearance no longer feels like the start of the mystery. It becomes the moment where the knot makes sure Jonas will exist. That is the power of the show's structure. It is not just nonlinear for style. It is designed so that later information changes the meaning of earlier scenes. A yellow raincoat is not just a visual choice. It becomes a symbol of Jonas's identity, his innocence, his repetition, and his connection to time. The cave is not just a spooky location. It is the physical mouth of the loop. The nuclear plant is not just a secretive institution. It is where human ambition, government cover-up, and unstable matter converge into something far beyond normal science. The bunker is not just a crime scene. It is one of the early laboratories where the loop's cruelty becomes visible through the suffering of children. Even the title Dark becomes more layered. At first it seems to describe the mood. The show is literally dark, rainy, shadowed, quiet, full of forests, tunnels, and dim rooms. Then it describes the mystery, the unknown, the hidden past, the secrets parents keep from children. But by the end, darkness means something deeper. It is the place people enter when grief becomes too large to accept. It is the emotional state where love and obsession become hard to separate. That is why Dark never feels like a normal detective story, even when it uses detective story tools. There are missing children, police boards, suspects, interviews, old evidence, strange objects, and hidden rooms. But the real investigation is not about catching one criminal. It is about uncovering a system where almost everyone is both victim and cause. The show keeps making the audience ask not only, who did this, but what kind of pain would make someone do this? That question matters most with Jonas. Jonas's arc is one of the darkest hero arcs in modern streaming television because it doesn't simply ask whether a good person can become bad. It shows the steps by which a wounded person can become convinced that moral horror is necessary. Young Jonas is sensitive, confused, and deeply human. He wants his father back. He wants Martha. He wants the truth. He wants to stop the apocalypse. Even when he makes mistakes, his motives are emotionally understandable. But the show places him inside a system where every attempt to save someone makes things worse. He is constantly punished for hope. Every door he opens reveals another version of his failure. The stranger, the middle version of Jonas, is what happens after years of carrying that knowledge. He is more controlled, more secretive, more willing to manipulate. He still wants to end the loop, but he has already begun to lose the openness that made young Jonas sympathetic. He withholds information from his younger self because he believes too much truth at the wrong time will ruin the plan. Of course, that withholding is exactly how the cycle keeps reproducing itself. Then Adam is the final distortion. He has lived with the loop so long that compassion has turned abstract. He can still speak the language of love and sacrifice, but he no longer responds to individual suffering the way Jonas once did. People become necessary losses. Martha becomes both beloved and symbolic. The world becomes a problem to be solved through annihilation. That progression is frightening because it feels psychologically connected. Adam is not random. He is young Jonas after too many repetitions of the same wound. And that means the show's real horror is not only that Jonas might become Adam. It is that, under enough pain, Adam's logic begins to sound understandable. Dark never asks us to approve of Adam, but it does ask us to recognize him. He is the part of grief that stops asking how to heal and starts asking how to end everything. Martha's arc mirrors and complicates this. In the first world, she is often seen through Jonas's love and loss. She is the person whose death helps push him toward Adam. But the alternate Martha gives the character her own tragic path. She becomes the center of Eva's world, just as Jonas is the center of Adam's. She is manipulated, split into different outcomes, and forced into a role she never asked for. Eva, like Adam, is not simply an older version in makeup and costume. She is a philosophical endpoint, where Adam becomes destruction, Eva becomes preservation. She cannot let the knot die because the knot contains her son. She would rather maintain a world of suffering than accept the erasure of the child she loves. And that is what makes Adam and Eva such strong opposites. They both come from the same original emotional source, the love between Jonas and Martha. But they process suffering in opposite directions. Adam says, "This should never have existed." Eva says, "Because it exists, it must continue." Neither can fully release the object of their pain. That is why their names matter too. Adam and Eva suggest origin, creation, the first man and woman, the beginning of a human world. But in Dark, they are false origins. They believe they stand at the center of creation, but they are themselves consequences of another wound. The names are grand, almost biblical, but the final truth humbles them. They are not gods. They are children of a broken machine. This is one of the show's cleverest moves. It lets characters build mythologies around themselves, then reveals that mythology as another layer of misunderstanding. Sic Mundus believes in a grand order. Adam believes in a final war against time. Eva believes in preserving the cycle. Noah believes in prophecy and purpose. But the true origin is not mythic at all. It is a grieving clockmaker in an origin world, trying to undo one family death. That contrast makes the story more human. The people inside the knot turn their suffering into religion because the truth is too unbearable. It is easier to believe you are chosen by time than to admit you are trapped by someone else's grief. Noah is the clearest example of that. His priest-like appearance, his language of faith, and his calm violence make him seem like someone above ordinary emotion. But his deepest motive is painfully human. He wants his family. He wants Charlotte. He wants the promise he has been given to be true. When he realizes Adam has used him, his faith collapses into rage. That betrayal does not erase his crimes, but it makes his life feel tragic rather than merely sinister. The same is true for Helge. Early on, he seems like a frightening participant in the kidnappings. But across the full series, he becomes one of the saddest victims of the loop. As a child, he is isolated and harmed. As an adult, he is manipulated into helping Noah. As an old man, he is consumed by guilt and confusion. Helge is what happens when a vulnerable person is caught by forces far beyond his ability to resist. Dark repeatedly refuses the comfort of clean moral categories. Ulrich is a loving father and a violent man. Hannah is wounded and cruel. Claudia is brilliant and manipulative. Noah is monstrous and broken. Adam is evil in action but born from a hero's pain. Eva is protective and ruthless. Even Tannhaus, the origin point of the tragedy, is sympathetic and catastrophic at the same time. This moral complexity is a major reason the show holds up beyond its puzzle. Once the timelines are understood, the characters still remain interesting because they are not just functions in a chart. They are people whose emotions have become dangerous. Another major strength is how the series uses repetition. In many stories, repetition can feel lazy. In Dark, repetition is the point. The same phrases return. The same gestures return. The same locations return. Characters repeat the mistakes of their parents, then discover they are literally connected to those parents in impossible ways. The show's famous line about everything being connected is not just a slogan. It is the entire storytelling method. The repetition creates dread because the audience begins to recognize patterns before the characters do. We see someone make a choice, and we can feel the cycle tightening. We know that a rescue attempt may become a cause of the disaster. We know that a secret kept for protection may become the reason someone suffers. We know that a person saying they want to stop the loop may already be doing exactly what the loop requires. That makes Dark a show about dramatic irony at the highest level. The viewer often knows enough to fear what the character thinks is hope. Michael's suicide is one of the best examples. The first time, it is mysterious and devastating. Later, when Jonas travels back and speaks to him, the scene becomes almost unbearable because we understand that Jonas's attempt to stop it is part of what makes it happen. Michael does not die because he loves Jonas less. He dies because he loves Jonas enough to preserve the reality where Jonas exists. That is a terrible kind of love, and Dark is full of it. Claudia's love for Regina pushes her through time, but it also makes her deceptive. Eva's love for her son sustains an entire suffering system. Ulrich's love for Mikkel leads to violence against Helgi. Katharina's love for her family sends her into the past, where her own mother kills her. Noah's love for Charlotte makes him vulnerable to Adam's manipulation. Tannhaus's love for his dead family creates two broken worlds. The series is not anti-love, but it is deeply suspicious of love when it refuses limits. Love without acceptance becomes possession. Love without humility becomes control. Love without grief becomes a machine that tries to force reality open. This is why the finale's sacrifice feels like the only real answer. Jonas and Martha do not win because they love harder than everyone else. Many characters love intensely. They win because, in the end, they love without trying to keep themselves. They accept erasure so the origin wound can heal. That is the moral reversal of the entire show. Everyone else tries to save their own beloved person, their own child, their own world, their own version of the future. Jonas and Martha save people they do not truly know in a world where they will not survive. They act without reward. They break the pattern of selfish grief. And because of that, they become the only characters who truly escape the knot, not by living, by letting go. The production style of Dark supports all of this with unusual discipline. The show's creators, Baran Bo Odar and Janche Friese, built a visual language that makes time periods feel connected without making them identical. Winden in the 1950s, 1980s, 2010s, and future has different textures, but it always feels like the same haunted place. The camera often moves with patience. Scenes breathe. Silence matters. Rooms feel heavy with things unsaid. The casting is also one of the show's most praised achievements. Because characters appear at different ages, the series depends on viewers believing that younger and older versions are the same people. Dark handles this with remarkable care. Facial resemblance, posture, emotional rhythm, and costume all help sell the illusion. The result is that time travel feels embodied. You are not just told that this older person is the same character. You often feel it before the show confirms it. That matters because the emotional impact depends on recognition. When we see older Jonas, older Claudia, older Ulrich, older Helgi, or older Martha, the point is not only plot information. The point is time made visible. A person's face becomes evidence of what the loop has done to them. The music and sound design deepen that feeling. Dark often uses music not to energize scenes but to create mourning. Even moments of revelation are scored less like victories and more like funerals. The show knows that an answer in Winden usually means another wound has opened. And the pacing, while slow for some viewers, is part of the design. Dark does not rush because it wants the audience to sit with confusion. It wants family names, objects, dates, and locations to accumulate in the mind. The complexity is not meant to be consumed casually. It asks for attention and then rewards that attention by making small details matter later. That kind of storytelling is risky in streaming television. Many shows depend on constant cliffhangers without full payoff. Dark builds cliffhangers too, but it also builds toward a planned endpoint. Its three-season structure gives it a sense of intention. The final season may be dense, and some viewers may find the alternate world mechanics challenging, but the emotional destination is clearly connected to the beginning. This is why Dark's reputation has remained strong. It feels designed, not improvised. Its mysteries are not endless doors opening into more empty corridors. They lead back to a human origin, and that origin makes the whole series tragic in retrospect, because the two worlds of Adam and Eva are full of people who laugh, love, betray, search, suffer, and hope. They feel real to themselves. They feel real to us, but they are also, in the final logic, the result of a mistake reality was never meant to hold. Their existence is meaningful yet unstable, beautiful yet wrong. That contradiction is what makes the ending linger. The show asks us to grieve people who never should have existed, and somehow we do. That is a very rare achievement. Many time travel stories make erased timelines feel disposable. Dark makes erasure feel like mourning. Jonas and Martha fading away is not just the correction of a paradox. It is the death of the emotional center we have followed for 3 seasons. The fact that their sacrifice saves the origin world does not make it painless. It makes it sacred. By the final scene, when Hannah considers naming her child Jonas, the show leaves us with a tiny echo instead of a full resurrection. It does not undo the ending. It does not say the knot will return. It simply suggests that the emotional trace of Jonas remains somewhere beyond logic. A name, a dream, a feeling in the dark, and that is enough. Because Dark was never trying to tell us that everything can be perfectly fixed. It was telling us that everything is connected, even pain, even love, even lives that vanish. The question is whether connection becomes a prison or a gift. For most of the series, connection is a prison. Family ties trap people in paradox. Love binds them to cycles of harm. Secrets connect generations through damage. Time connects cause and effect so tightly that choice seems impossible. But in the finale, connection becomes a gift. Jonas and Martha connect to the origin world long enough to save it. Claudia connects enough clues to find the truth. Tannhaus reconnects with his son because the accident is prevented. Regina lives in a world where her mother's impossible war is no longer needed. The knot dissolves, but not into meaninglessness. It dissolves into a world where ordinary life can continue. And after 3 seasons of people fighting time, ordinary life feels almost miraculous. Another reason Dark works so well is that it understands mystery as emotional architecture, not just information control. A lot of mystery shows hide answers to create suspense. Dark hides answers too, but the real suspense comes from meaning. When the show reveals that Mikkel is Michael, the question is not only, how did that happen? It is, what does that do to Jonas? When it reveals that Adam is Jonas, the question is not only, how does he become that? It is, what amount of suffering could turn this boy into that man? When it reveals the origin world, the question is not only, where did the knot begin? It is, was everyone we loved born from a grief that should have been allowed to remain grief? That is why the show's best twists do not feel like tricks. They feel like emotional reclassification. The viewer is forced to go back through memory and rewrite the meaning of what they already saw. Mikkel's sadness becomes Michael's lifelong displacement. Jonas's grief becomes part of the machinery that created him. Noah's coldness becomes a mask over longing. Claudia's secrecy becomes a mother's impossible mission. The cave becomes not a doorway to adventure, but a wound that people keep entering because they cannot accept the limits of their own lives. This is also why the series rewards patience. Dark does not always explain a reveal the second it appears. Sometimes it lets an image sit in the viewer's mind for hours before giving it context. The old photograph of Sic Mundus, the emerald tablet, the time machine in the suitcase, the St. Christopher pendant, the family tree, the wall of photos, the repeating phrase about everything being connected. These details work almost like ritual objects. They appear, disappear, return, and gather meaning. The St. Christopher pendant is a perfect example. It moves between people, times, and worlds, connecting Jonas and Martha, the lake, Egon, Hannah, Helene, and Katharina's tragic fate. On a surface level, it is just an object. But in Dark, objects can become witnesses. They survive when people do not. They carry emotional history across eras. The pendant becomes a silent reminder that the past is not gone. It is waiting to be recognized. The time machine itself works in a similar way. It does not have one clean origin in the usual sense. Its design is part of a bootstrap paradox, passed through time in ways that blur invention and inheritance. Tannhaus builds and understands parts of the device, but the information around it is also shaped by time travelers who bring him knowledge from a future that depends on his work. This is one of the show's central ideas made physical. The loop creates things that seem to have no first author. That idea is disturbing because it attacks the normal comfort of cause and effect. Human beings like beginnings. We like to believe that if we find the first cause, we can understand the system. But in Adam and Eva's worlds, many things have no normal beginning. They are born from repetition. The book about time travel, the machine, the family lines, the instructions, even certain identities, they exist because they have always existed inside the knot. And that is why the origin world reveal is so important. It gives the audience a beginning outside the closed loop. The knot itself contains many circular origins, but the split has a cause: Tannhaus's grief and experiment. That final answer does not simplify every internal paradox, but it gives the entire nightmare an emotional source. The show's use of Winden as a setting also becomes more powerful across the full series. Winden feels specific and symbolic at the same time. It is a German town with a nuclear plant, schools, police stations, family homes, forests, and old roads, but it also feels like a sealed chamber. Characters talk about leaving, but very few truly escape. The town seems to hold people in place not by walls, but by secrets. The name Winden itself suggests winding, twisting, turning. Whether the viewer thinks about that consciously or not, the town feels like a knot long before the word becomes central. Roads curve into forests. Tunnels lead into other eras. Families loop back into themselves. Even conversations often feel circular, with parents and children repeating versions of pain they do not fully understand. The nuclear plant is especially important because it connects private family drama to public secrecy. Bernd Doppler, Claudia Tiedemann, Alexander Tiedemann, and others are tied to the plant's history. The hidden radioactive waste, the accident, the cover-ups, and the God particle all show how institutions can bury danger for the sake of control. Dark is not mainly a political show, but it understands that family secrets and institutional secrets operate in similar ways. Both depend on silence. Both poison the future. And in Winden, the future is literally poisoned. The apocalypse is the ultimate result of things hidden too long. Barrels are concealed. Truths are delayed. Investigations are blocked. People protect reputations, families, careers, and plans. Then the hidden matter erupts into catastrophe. On a symbolic level, the apocalypse is what happens when buried truth finally becomes physically impossible to contain. That is why the show's atmosphere is so consistent. Even in ordinary domestic scenes, there is pressure. A kitchen conversation can feel as tense as a time travel reveal because everyone is withholding something. Hannah withholds, Ulrich withholds, Charlotte withholds, Peter withholds, Alexander withholds, Claudia withholds. The town is built on incomplete sentences. Dark also uses children in a way that is deeply unsettling. The missing children are not just plot devices, they represent the cost of adult obsession. Eric, Mads, Yasin, Mikkel, Helgi as a child, Elisabeth, Charlotte as a baby, and others are all caught inside systems created or maintained by adults who claim to be pursuing some greater purpose. Noah's chair experiments are horrifying, not only because they kill children, but because they reveal how easily ideology can turn innocence into material. This is one of the show's darkest moral accusations. Adults keep saying they are trying to save families, save the world, preserve existence, or end suffering. But children keep paying the price. Mikkel pays the price for the loop that creates Jonas. Mads pays the price for the experiments. Yasin and Eric pay the price for the early time machine attempts. Helgi pays the price for Ulrich's desperate violence and Noah's manipulation. Charlotte and Elisabeth pay the price for a family structure that has no natural beginning. The unknown pays the price for being treated less like a child and more like the center of a cosmic argument. The show repeatedly asks, what kind of world do adults create when they refuse to accept pain? The answer is a world where children inherit impossible burdens. This gives extra weight to Jonas and Martha's final sacrifice. They are young people who end a nightmare created by older grief. They break a chain that adults kept preserving, manipulating, and rationalizing. In a series full of parents harming children in the name of love, Jonas and Martha become children who save a parent from becoming the origin of harm. That reversal is quiet but powerful. The relationship between parents and children is everywhere in Dark and almost never simple. Ulrich wants to save Mikkel but destroys another child. Katharina wants to save her family but is destroyed by her own mother. Hannah wants love but repeatedly damages the family around her. Claudia wants Regina to live and becomes a manipulator across time. Noah wants Charlotte and becomes an instrument of Adam. Eva wants her son and preserves the knot. Tannhaus wants his family back and breaks reality. Even when love is sincere, it is often mixed with control, guilt, fear, or denial. That is why Regina's survival in the origin world feels so important. Regina is one of the few characters whose suffering is not presented as grand or mythic. She is bullied as a young woman, emotionally neglected by Claudia, trapped in Winden's darkness, then later sick and vulnerable. She is not a Time War general or a cosmic symbol. She is a daughter who needed more love than she received. Claudia's mission to save her could have become selfish in the same way Eva's love becomes selfish. But Claudia ultimately finds a solution that does not preserve the knot for Regina alone. She finds the truth that ends the false worlds and allows Regina to exist in the origin world, free from that specific nightmare. It is not a perfect victory, but it is one of the show's few clear mercies. Regina's presence at the final dinner tells us that something meaningful has been restored. Not the old world, not the lives of everyone we followed, but a world where she has a chance, and in Dark, a chance is enormous. The dinner scene also works because it refuses spectacle. After 3 seasons of apocalypse, caves, machines, alternate worlds, and time wars, the final surviving world is shown through people sitting together, eating, talking, and listening to rain. This is not a boring ending. It is the point. The thing the knot stole from everyone was not just safety. It stole ordinary life. It stole the possibility of a family dinner that does not secretly depend on paradox. The empty chairs are felt even if no one in that world knows who is missing. That is the strange grief of the finale. The viewer remembers people the world has forgotten. We remember Jonas. We remember Martha. We remember Mikkel, Michael, Ulrich, Charlotte, Elisabeth, Noah, Agnes. Bartos as he was pulled deeper into the machine, and so many others. The origin world does not mourn them because they were never there, but the audience mourns them because the story made them real. This creates a powerful final relationship between viewer and narrative. We become the memory the corrected world cannot have. In that sense, Dark's ending turns the audience into the keeper of the vanished worlds. The characters may disappear, but the viewer carries the emotional proof that they mattered. That is why the ending can feel both complete and haunting. The plot is resolved, but the feeling remains. And that feeling is exactly what Dark has been building from the start. The show is full of people afraid of being forgotten, afraid of losing someone, afraid that their suffering has no meaning. The finale says meaning does not depend on being remembered by the characters inside the story. Meaning can exist in sacrifice. Meaning can exist in the prevention of pain. Meaning can exist in a life that vanishes so another life can continue. That is a mature and difficult ending. It does not give fans the comfort of Jonas and Martha living happily together. It does not restore Mikkel to his family. It does not rescue Ulrich from his decades of suffering. It does not allow Charlotte and Elisabeth to settle into a normal mother-daughter relationship. It does not give Noah redemption through reunion. It does not give Adam a clean absolution. It does not let Eva keep her son. Instead, it asks whether the end of suffering is worth the loss of the world that suffering created. And the show's answer is yes, but it lets that yes hurt. That pain is why the finale works. If the ending were purely happy, it would betray the series. If it were purely hopeless, it would make the journey feel empty. Dark chooses something harder, tragic mercy. The knot is ended. The origin world survives. But the price is the erasure of people we loved. The final result is not victory in the usual sense. It is release. And release in Dark is the closest thing to salvation. To understand why Dark feels so different from many other time travel stories, it helps to look at how the series treats free will. In a lighter version of this genre, time travel gives characters power. They can go back, change a mistake, save someone, stop a disaster, or create a better future. The drama comes from whether they will make the right choice. Dark makes that fantasy almost unbearable, because in Winden, the ability to move through time does not automatically give anyone freedom. In many cases, it removes freedom. The more characters learn, the more they realize their choices may already be part of the pattern. The act of trying to escape the loop becomes one of the ways the loop protects itself. This is why the series repeats the question of whether people are truly choosing or simply fulfilling what has already happened. Adam insists that human desire is the engine of the cycle. People think they are free, but they always follow their wants, fears, and wounds. A person who loves will try to save. A person who grieves will try to undo. A person who feels betrayed will seek revenge. And because their emotional responses are predictable, the loop can use them. That idea is chilling because it suggests that the prison is not only time. The prison is character. Ulrich will always try to save Mikkel because he is Mikkel's father. Jonas will always chase the truth because Michael's death breaks him. Claudia will always search for a way to save Regina because Regina is her daughter. Eva will always protect the knot because her son exists inside it. Tannhaus will always reach toward the impossible because he cannot bear the loss of his family. Dark is not saying people are emotionless machines. It is saying the opposite. People are so deeply emotional that their emotions become chains. This is why the show's repeated phrase about people not being free in what they want matters. You can choose an action, but can you choose the desire underneath it? Can Ulrich choose not to love his son? Can Claudia choose not to want Regina alive? Can Eva choose not to protect her child? Can Jonas choose not to love Martha? The tragedy is that the loop does not need to force people in a mechanical way all the time. It often only needs to place them in front of the thing they already want most. Then they walk into the trap themselves. Jonas's path shows this again and again. He is warned, guided, misled, and manipulated by older versions of himself and by other travelers. But the reason those manipulations work is that they touch real emotions. He wants Michael to live. He wants Martha to survive. He wants the apocalypse stopped. He wants the truth to mean something. Adam knows this because Adam once wanted all of it too. That makes Adam's manipulation of Jonas especially cruel. It is not the manipulation of a stranger. It is self-knowledge turned into violence. Adam can predict Jonas because he remembers being Jonas. He knows which pain will move him. He knows which hope will blind him. He knows that if Martha dies in the right way, Jonas will be pushed toward the same darkness Adam now inhabits. Eva does something similar with Martha. She understands her younger self's love, confusion, and fear. She uses those emotions to preserve the knot. The older self becomes the architect of the younger self's prison. That is one of the show's most disturbing ideas. The enemy is often not someone else. The enemy is the version of you that pain might create. The stranger is already a warning of this before Adam fully appears. He is not as monstrous as Adam, but he is already compromised. He lies to young Jonas. He makes decisions on behalf of others. He believes that because he has suffered more, he understands more. And maybe he does understand more facts. But understanding facts does not mean he is free from the emotional pattern. This is one of Dark's most mature insights. Knowledge alone does not save anyone. Many characters learn the truth and still repeat the cycle. Ulrich learns time travel is real and still commits the act that shapes Helgi's future. Jonas learns Mikkel is Michael and still becomes part of Michael's suicide. Claudia learns more than almost anyone and still spends years manipulating events. Noah learns pieces of the truth but remains trapped by faith and longing. Even Adam and Eva, who know enormous amounts, remain wrong about the deepest origin for most of the series. The show is almost ruthless about this. It does not treat information as salvation. It treats information as dangerous unless the character also changes their relationship to desire, grief, and control. That is why Claudia's final role is so important. She does not win simply because she gathers facts. She wins because she notices the limits of the two-world war and keeps looking beyond her own assumptions. Her love for Regina begins as the same kind of emotional chain that traps everyone else, but Claudia eventually turns that love into investigation rather than pure preservation. She becomes willing to find an answer that does not simply protect her preferred version of reality. In other words, Claudia's breakthrough is not only scientific, it is moral. She stops asking, "How do I keep what I want?" and starts asking, "What is the truth of this system?" That shift is what Adam and Eva failed to make for so long. Adam sees the knot through his own suffering. Eva sees it through her child's survival. Both are brilliant, but both are trapped inside personal pain. Claudia is also motivated by personal pain, but she eventually sees past the false origin. This is where Dark becomes more than a puzzle show. A puzzle show only needs someone to solve the mechanism. Dark needs someone to solve the emotional lie underneath the mechanism. The lie is that if you control time, you can control loss. Every major character is tempted by that lie. Some use machines, some use caves, some use knowledge, some use murder, some use secrecy, some use devotion, but they are all trying to negotiate with loss. They want a version of reality where the unbearable thing does not have to be accepted. The ending says that the only real freedom comes when someone finally stops negotiating. Jonas and Martha do not use the origin world to save themselves. They do not try to create a better branch where they can live together. They do not bargain for Mikkel, Michael, Ulrich, or their own child. They go to the moment before the original tragedy and prevent the act of grief that would create their worlds. They accept that their reward is non-existence. That is why they are freer at the end than Adam or Eva ever were. Adam and Eva had power over time, but they were enslaved by their refusal to let go. Jonas and Martha lose their future, but in that loss they make a choice that is not ruled by possession. This is also why the final sacrifice feels spiritually powerful. even though the show is built from science fiction elements. Dark uses wormholes, nuclear accidents, alternate realities, and time machines, but the final emotional movement is almost spiritual. Two people give themselves up so others can live. A world built from grief dissolves. A wound is healed by the ones born from it, and yet the show avoids becoming sentimental because the cost remains real. The people erased are not treated as mistakes we should casually forget. The series spends too much time making them human for that. Jonas and Martha's disappearance is gentle, but it is still devastating. The vanished worlds were broken, but they contained love. They contained friendships, families, memories, and moments of tenderness. The show holds both truths at once. The knot should end. The people inside it mattered. That tension is the final emotional signature of Dark. Another hidden strength of the series is how it uses names and identities. Many characters carry names that echo across generations, and those echoes create confusion but also meaning. Michael was Mikkel. Jonas becomes the stranger, then Adam. Martha becomes Eva. Hanno becomes Noah. Characters are constantly renamed by time, faith, trauma, or disguise. A name in Dark is not always stable. It can be a mask, a clue, a prophecy, or a wound. Michael's name is especially tragic because it represents adaptation. Mikkel becomes Michael because he has to survive in the wrong time. His new identity is built on loss. He grows up, marries Hannah, has Jonas, and lives an entire life, but the child he was never fully disappears. When we understand that, Michael's quiet sadness becomes one of the saddest things in the show. He is a missing child who grew into a father while still belonging somewhere else. Jonas inherits that sadness without understanding it. His entire life is shaped by a father whose existence was already a displacement. That is why Jonas feels haunted before he knows the facts. His family home is built on an impossible absence. Noah's name works differently. It gives him a biblical weight, suggesting salvation, prophecy, and chosen purpose. But the name also hides Hanno, the human being underneath. Noah performs certainty because he has been folded into Sic Mundus's belief system. His name makes him seem like a prophet, but his life reveals him as another manipulated child of the knot. Adam and Eva's names do something similar on a larger scale. They make Jonas and Martha sound like the first parents of a world. But the finale reveals they are not the true beginning. Their names are part of the mythology created inside the broken worlds. They are grand titles for people who are still, underneath everything, wounded versions of two young lovers. This tension between myth and humanity runs through the entire series. Sic Mundus turns time travel into religion. Adam turns suffering into doctrine. Eva turns preservation into destiny. Noah turns obedience into faith. But the show keeps stripping the myth away to reveal grief underneath. That is why Tannhaus is such a fitting origin figure. He is a clockmaker, a man associated with time, mechanism, precision, and theory. But his defining act is not cold scientific curiosity. It is emotional collapse. He builds because he mourns. The machine is born from a father's broken heart. That makes the series feel circular in a beautiful way. The man who writes and speaks about time is not outside the story's emotional logic. He is its source. The intellectual mystery begins in a feeling that everyone understands, the wish to see the dead again. Dark takes that wish seriously enough to show its danger, because almost everyone has imagined undoing a loss. Almost everyone has thought, even for a second, that if they could go back, they would say something different, stop someone from leaving, prevent one accident, make one phone call, choose one better word. Dark turns that universal fantasy into a nightmare, not because love is bad, but because reality cannot survive unlimited refusal. This is why the show can be so complex and still feel emotionally accessible. The timeline may be difficult, but the human desire is simple. Please don't let this happen. That sentence could belong to almost every major character. Jonas says it about Michael and Martha. Ulrich says it about Mikkel. Katharina says it about her family. Claudia says it about Regina. Noah says it about Charlotte. Eva says it about her son. Tannhaus says it about his dead family. And Dark answers, if that wish becomes stronger than acceptance, it can devour the world. The production design constantly reinforces that emotional coldness. Winden is full of enclosed spaces, caves, bunkers, hospital rooms, interrogation rooms, school corridors, power plant interiors, Sic Mundus chambers. Characters are often framed as if trapped by architecture before they even learn they are trapped by time. Doorways and tunnels matter because the whole show is about thresholds, the desire to cross from one state into another, past to future, grief to repair, ignorance to knowledge, life to death, one world to another. But every threshold has a cost. The cave promises passage, but it destroys families. The machine promises control, but it continues the loop. The apocalypse loophole promises difference, but only inside a narrow wound in time. The origin world promises truth, but it requires erasure. Dark never gives a doorway without a price. That is a major reason its world feels so consistent. There is no magical escape hatch that ignores the rules. Even the final solution obeys the emotional law of the series. Loss must be accepted. The only difference is that, at the end, the loss is chosen for the sake of healing rather than denied for the sake of control. That is also why the final dinner scene is so moving. The surviving origin world is not presented as a reward paradise. It is ordinary, imperfect, slightly strange. The characters still have histories. They still have personalities. Hannah is still Hannah. Weller is still interrupted before fully explaining his eye, preserving one of the show's small running mysteries. People laugh, talk, and sit under flickering lights. The world is not perfect. It is simply not trapped. And after watching 3 seasons of cosmic imprisonment, that is enough. The absence of the knot does not remove all darkness from human life. People will still argue, age, become sick, and die. But those losses will belong to life, not to a closed system created by a machine. They will be painful, but not endlessly recycled across impossible generations. That distinction is the show's final mercy. Dark does not promise a world without grief. It promises that grief no longer has to become a prison. That is why the ending's title, In Spirit, could be understood as a movement from control to release. For the whole series, characters try to control time because they cannot control pain. The finale lets pain remain, but removes the false worlds created by refusing it. The story begins with a suicide, a missing child, and a town full of secrets. It ends with a family turning back from a bridge, a child surviving, and 2 impossible teenagers fading into light. That is a complete circle, but for once, not a trap. A circle can be a prison when it repeats forever. It can also be closure when it finally ends. The final reason Dark remains so powerful is that it respects the audience. It trusts viewers to follow complexity, but it also trusts them to feel before they fully understand. There are moments in the series where the family tree may seem impossible, where the timeline feels like a maze, where a character's older or younger version appears before the viewer has all the context. But even in those moments, the emotional signal is clear. Someone is grieving, someone is hiding, someone is trying to save a person they love, someone is about to become the cause of the pain they fear most. That emotional clarity is what keeps the complexity from becoming empty. A viewer may need time to understand how Charlotte can be Elisabeth's daughter and mother. But the feeling is immediate. This family bond has been violated by time itself. A viewer may need a chart to track how Bartos, Celia, Noah, Agnes, Tronte, and the Nielsen line connect. But the emotional pattern is clear. Generations are not moving forward naturally. They are curling inward. A viewer may need to rewatch to understand the loophole during the apocalypse. But the dramatic purpose is clear. The cycle has one crack, and that crack is where sacrifice can enter. Dark is dense, but it is not random. Every major reveal serves the larger design. Mikkel becoming Michael explains Jonas's existence and turns the missing child mystery into a family tragedy. Jonas becoming Adam turns the hero's journey into a warning. Martha becoming Eva mirrors Jonas's corruption and expands the story into a two-world tragedy. Tannhaus creating the split turns the entire Time War mythology back into a story about a grieving father. That is why the full series feels planned. It does not simply keep adding twists to delay the ending. It uses twists to move closer to the real wound. And the real wound is always loss. This is also why the show's darkness never feels cheap. Dark has murders, disappearances, betrayal, suicide, apocalypse, and emotional cruelty. But it is not interested in shock for shock's sake. The pain usually has consequence. The violence scars the timeline. The lies reshape families. The deaths become echoes. Even when the show is bleak, it is rarely careless. Take Ulrich's attack on young Helge. In another story, that might simply be a shocking moment where a desperate father crosses the line. In Dark, it becomes a structural event. It shapes Helge's life, deepens the loop, exposes Ulrich's moral collapse, and proves that trying to destroy the future can become one of the ways the future is made. The scene is brutal because it matters on every level: plot, character, theme, and paradox. That is the level of design the series keeps returning to. The same is true with Michael's suicide. It is not only a tragic opening, it becomes a fixed point around which Jonas's identity forms. It is connected to Mikkel's displacement, Jonas's intervention, the preservation of Jonas's life, and the larger cruelty of the knot. What begins as one man's death becomes a map of the entire series. Or look at Katharina. For a long time, she seems like a character defined by anger. Angry wife, angry mother, angry principal, angry survivor of betrayal. But as the story expands, that anger becomes understandable as a defense against lifelong wounds. Her attempt to save Ulrich shows the depth of her love, and her death at the hands of her own mother turns her life into one of the show's most devastating closed circles. Even her name carries tragic irony, tied to the identity Helene takes from the woman she kills. Dark is full of these cruel connections, but they work because they are not just clever, they hurt. The show also understands that time does not heal everything. That phrase is often used casually, but Dark almost argues the opposite. Time can preserve pain. Time can hide pain. Time can pass pain to someone else. Time can make a child into a parent, a victim into an accomplice, a hero into a villain, a lover into an enemy. Time by itself is not mercy. Mercy comes only when someone breaks the emotional pattern. That is why Jonas and Martha's final act is so important. They do not simply solve the timeline. They do what almost no one else can do. They act without trying to preserve their own wound. They do not save their own love story. They do not save their own families. They do not save the worlds that made them. They save the origin family, and by doing so, they allow everything false to dissolve. Their sacrifice also gives the title one final meaning. In the beginning, dark is the place where secrets live. By the end, darkness becomes the space before release. Hannah's final dream describes a darkness that does not feel only terrifying. It feels peaceful, like the end of a long burden. That is a surprising turn. The darkness that haunted the whole series becomes, in the final emotional echo, a kind of rest. Because for the people of the knot, existence itself had become exhaustion. They were tired across generations, tired of searching, tired of losing, tired of repeating, tired of being born into pain arranged by someone else's grief. The disappearance of the knot is not just destruction. It is sleep after centuries of suffering, and yet the show leaves behind that final name, Jonas. This matters because Dark refuses to make erasure feel absolute in an emotional sense. The corrected world does not remember Jonas as a person, but the story lets his name rise like a ripple. Maybe it means nothing more than Hannah liking the sound of it. Maybe it is a trace from the vanished worlds. Maybe it is the show's way of saying that even erased lives can leave an imprint on the soul of reality. The beauty is that Dark does not over-explain it. After so much complexity, the final mystery is small and human. A woman at a dinner table thinks about a name. Outside, the storm passes. The lights flicker. The world continues. That restraint is part of why the ending works. The show gives enough closure to resolve the central story, but it does not flatten the emotional aftertaste. It leaves room for the viewer to sit with what was lost. And what was lost is enormous. Jonas never grows up in the origin world. Martha never becomes the girl he loves. Mikkel never travels to 1986 and never becomes Michael. Ulrich's impossible suffering never unfolds in that form. Charlotte and Elisabeth's paradoxical bond disappears. Noah and Agnes, Adam and Eva, the unknown, Sic Mundus as we knew it, the apocalypse worlds, all of it vanishes with the knot. But because it vanishes, Tannhaus's family lives. Marek turns back. Sonia survives. Their child survives. Tannhaus does not become the father whose grief breaks the world, and Regina sits alive at dinner. That is the trade. Dark does not pretend the trade is easy. It simply shows why it is necessary. This is the difference between a sad ending and a tragic ending. A sad ending only hurts. A tragic ending hurts because it reveals the shape of necessity. Jonas and Martha must disappear because their existence depends on the suffering they are ending. Their sacrifice is not arbitrary. It is the only answer that matches the moral rules of the story. Throughout the series, characters try to escape consequence. The finale accepts consequence fully. That is why the last act feels earned. The show's strongest message may be that pain cannot be defeated by control. The more characters try to control time, the more trapped they become. Ulrich tries to control the future through violence. Claudia tries to control outcomes through knowledge. Noah tries to control suffering through faith. Eva tries to control existence through preservation. Adam tries to control pain through annihilation. Tannhaus tries to control death through invention. But control is the wrong language. The only thing that ends the knot is acceptance. Not passive acceptance of cruelty. Not doing nothing. Jonas and Martha act. Claudia acts. But the action is finally aligned with letting go instead of forcing possession. The goal is no longer to keep the beloved at any cost. The goal is to prevent grief from becoming a world-devouring machine. That is an incredibly mature ending for a science fiction mystery. It understands that the deepest human conflicts cannot be solved by technology alone. A time machine can open a passage, but it cannot teach a person how to grieve. A loophole can create a chance, but it cannot choose sacrifice for you. Knowledge can reveal the origin, but it cannot make letting go painless. Dark turns time travel into a test of the soul. Most characters fail that test for a long time. Some never pass it. But in the end, Jonas and Martha do. And that is why their disappearance feels less like defeat than grace. For viewers, the full series offers more than a recap-friendly puzzle. It offers a complete emotional journey through cause, consequence, inheritance, and release. It begins with the fear that children are vanishing into the dark. It ends with the understanding that entire worlds can vanish so one original child can live. It begins with a son mourning his father. It ends with two impossible children saving a father from becoming the origin of endless mourning. That symmetry is beautiful, and it is brutal, because Dark knows that the stories we inherit are not always stories we chose. Jonas inherits Michael's secret. Martha inherits Eva's war. Charlotte and Elisabeth inherit a family paradox. Noah inherits Sic Mundus. Claudia inherits a knot of ambition, guilt, and maternal love. Winden inherits the cover-ups of the nuclear plant. Everyone inherits something. The question is whether inheritance must become destiny. For most of the show, the answer seems to be yes. The knot repeats because everyone follows the emotional script written for them. But the finale finds the one place where destiny can be interrupted. Not everywhere, not easily, but enough. Enough for Jonas and Martha to step into the origin world. Enough for Marek to turn back. Enough for Tannhaus to keep his family. Enough for the false worlds to finally rest. That is why Dark's ending is not just the loop is broken. It is more specific and more moving than that. The grief is returned to its proper size. One family tragedy no longer becomes two universes of suffering. One father's loss no longer imprisons generations. One refusal to accept death no longer creates endless death. And that is the final mercy. If there is one hidden lesson in the full series, it is that love must learn where it ends. That sounds harsh, but Dark proves it again and again. Love that tries to own time becomes destructive. Love that refuses death becomes violence. Love that treats existence as something to preserve at any cost can become indistinguishable from cruelty. But love that can release, love that can sacrifice, love that can accept its own ending for the sake of another life, that becomes redemptive. Jonas and Martha's love is impossible, paradoxical, and doomed. But in the final moment, it becomes the one love in the series strong enough to let go. That is why their final scene stays with us. They are not rewarded with a future together. They are not remembered by the world they save. They do not get a normal life, a family, or peace in the ordinary sense. They get a moment of understanding. They get to see each other. They get to know that their pain was not meaningless, and then they fade. For a story obsessed with time, the final gift is not more time. It is meaning, and that may be the most honest thing Dark says. None of us can control time. None of us can undo every loss. None of us can guarantee that love will not hurt. But meaning can still exist in what we choose to do with the time we have, and in whether we pass our pain forward or finally let it end with us. That is why Dark is more than one of Netflix's best science fiction series. It is a complete tragedy about the human refusal to accept loss, disguised as a time travel mystery, built like a puzzle box, and finished like a prayer for release. It asks what we would change if we could go back. Then it slowly reveals the better question. What would we stop ourselves from changing if changing it meant the pain never ended? For 3 seasons, Winden is the answer to that nightmare. A town where everyone tries to fix the past, and the past keeps bleeding into the future. A town where parents and children become each other's ghosts. A town where love creates loops, secrets create apocalypse, and time does not heal because no one lets the wound close. But in the end, the wound does close. Not perfectly, not without loss, not without erasing people we cared about. But it closes, the car turns back, the family returns home, the storm passes, and somewhere in the quiet of the origin world, a name remains. Jonas, not as proof that the cycle continues, not as a promise that everything will happen again, but as an echo of the impossible lives that gave the real world another chance. If you want more full series breakdowns in this style, stay with Series Span Cinema. Because Dark is the kind of show that proves a great ending does not need to give every character what they wanted. Sometimes the greatest ending gives the story what it needed. And what Dark needed was not another loop, another world, or another attempt to defeat time. It needed the courage to let the end truly be the end.